Every time I make a video that mentions anything about weapon viability, I get comments on the video that go something like this. Well, that's for ranked modes, but this weapon's just made for turf war. Or, sure, competitive players may think that, but what's it like at low level? I even get a few of, you said that weapon is bad, but I got 18 splats on it, so why should I trust you? These questions are based on flawed assumptions that I want to address. Underlying all of these arguments, first of all, is that it's important to remain humble about analysis of the game. We all want to feel like we have a good understanding of the game, that we're smart and we're good at solving puzzles, like the puzzle of which weapon to use in this video game. That said, if you picked the game up at launch and have played 100 hours, expecting to understand the game at a higher level than a competitive player with 5,000 hours in Splatoon 2 and 800 hours in Splatoon 3 is arrogance. But even that misses the point, because tier lists are not based on the experiences of one competitive level player. They're based on an analyst's synthesis of top players' opinions, top players' collective results from matches they play against other top players, and theory derived from their debates with one another. People are statistically more likely to be correct and act more powerfully when they cooperate in groups. Not having access to the collective knowledge of other people who are trying to learn and improve at the game makes your own knowledge exponentially weaker. That being said, the most important point here to make is that the game is exactly the same whether you're C rank or top 500. The weapons work the same way, the maps are the same, the objectives work the same, all of the mechanics are identical, regardless of the skill level of the players involved. All that's different is that players in lower level lobbies are going to make more bad moves, their bad moves will be worse, and crucially, they will fail to punish more of their opponent's bad moves. As players improve, they will naturally gravitate more and more towards strategies that work. Learning happens when players take a punishable approach to a challenge, get punished for doing so, and adapt their approach so that their opponents can't capitalize on their play next time. Checking for sharks, aiming well, making objective plays at numbers advantage, all of these are more likely to win you games at every level. So players will naturally develop those skills at some point or another as they improve. The game itself will sand off the rough edges of beginner mistakes and misconceptions about the game's mechanics, and as it turns out, weak weapon choices. There are some weapons in the game that are worse at winning. Shorter ranges, lower fire rates, poor paint output, more situational specials, sub-weapons that don't make up for the weaknesses of the main weapon. These are factors that matter at C rank and at top 500 level. It doesn't matter whether I'm playing a chess grandmaster or a young child who's still figuring out how the horsey moves. If I put my queen in a position where it can be captured for free, that was still a poor move. It put me in a position where my opponent could capitalize on my mistake. And if they did, it would make the game harder for me to win. While it is true that the 6-year-old may just not see that and not take the queen, if you're trying to become a better chess player, you still want to learn from that scare and avoid that move next time. You put yourself in a position where whether your opponent got to gain an advantage over you was outside of your control. Whatever goofy gimmick play you were able to make because they didn't notice you blundered your queen, you can't expect that to continue working as you improve. So regardless of whether it worked or not, you'll want to stop doing it if your goal is to continue to win at higher and higher levels. As people get more familiar with the game, a lot of players start fixating on these kinds of gimmick strategies, which, as soon as they improve any further, they're going to be punished for using, because there's an answer to them that's obvious at a competitive level. As soon as someone's aim hits a certain threshold, trying to indirect someone to death with a Clash Blaster is just too slow a kill time to reliably win fights. As soon as someone learns to shoot while backing up, running at someone with the roller held on the ground to try and splat them that way is going to get beaten most of the time. I know there are a lot of content creators who make a living off coming up with creative off-meta strategies or playing the game in more challenging ways as a flex. But frankly, when someone tells me that they pulled something off like run speed big swig roller, I know that the opponents they were playing against made unforced errors to allow that to happen. You can just outrange a big swig or outdamage it at close range. Its paint is significant, but doesn't get it to a special that makes a big difference. So it's easy to displace and make irrelevant, to box out of the game. If someone's failing to execute counter strategies that take advantage of those weaknesses, they would have been even more vulnerable to weapons that have better range, or damage, or that paint for a more useful special. Being able to move and aim better can compensate for flaws in your weapon or strategy, but as soon as players start successfully executing counterplay strategies, you either pick something that works better, or you hit a wall and stop ranking up until you become significantly more skilled than your opponents and you can smurf on them again. Back in Splatoon 2, Kiver, one of the best players in all of Europe, decided to challenge himself to get the highest rank he could on the Aerospray MG. Normally, he scored in the 2800s for his X powers. When he chose the Aerospray, he hit a single-digit number of points underneath 2600. The weapon was in the same class as his main weapons, short-range shooters, so this wasn't a matter of him being less mechanically capable, not to a degree that's going to matter that much. The weapon itself was just weaker. Now, 2600 is a phenomenal power to reach. Very, very few people ever get there. It's usually top 500 level. But remember, the game is the same at C rank. The Aerospray's inaccurate, short-ranged, low-damage shots made it weaker even at low ranks in Splatoon 2. As time went on, many Splatoon 2 players moved from spray shooters like Splooshamatics and Aerosprays to something more like an NZAP 85, something which got results both in low-level play and high-level play. It was consistently one of the top-tier weapons in Splatoon 2, pretty much from as soon as the Tri-Slosher meta ended to the very final patch in the game. Yes, Aerospray can be top 500, but only in the hands of someone who could reach significantly higher using something else. In Splatoon 3, switching from supportive Aerospray to supportive Custom Splattershot Jr., or aggressive Aerospray to aggressive Splashomatic, will, given enough time to adjust, give you better results both at beginner level ranked and in top level tournament play. Splatoon isn't a solved game, and while it's not the most balanced a Splatoon game has ever been, patches have always tended to improve the game's balance, so I'm not going to say that if you're not running Splash or Sloshing Machine, you're throwing. It's just not true, even at top level. Looking at top level Japanese tournaments, the weapon variety is very heartening. Weapons you almost never see in the West are doing fine against stronger competition. But there are undeniably some weapons that have never been seen at the top level of play. And there's too strong an argument for me to deny that that's natural selection at work. It's evolution, woomy Darwinism, if you will. It's important, though, that when we make conclusions like that, we take into consideration some basic principles of statistics. Sample size matters. If there are only 40 elite-level players in the world, and there are more than 40 strategies that can work at an elite level, that means tournament results aren't fully representative of what's viable. Conversely, just because one top player wins one tournament with a weapon, doesn't mean that weapon is phenomenal. Maybe that player is a cut above the rest and could make other things work too. Maybe that player is uniquely attuned to that weapon in some way and the results are difficult to replicate. Maybe opponents haven't seen that weapon played that well before, and as soon as they figure out what that player is doing, they figure out a counterplay strategy and it won't work anymore. I trust that Splashomatic is a top tier because so many people play so much of it, and a generally effective counterplay strategy still hasn't arisen from any of the extremely bright minds that have been trying to work out how to play against it. But seeing one respectable tournament result from a weapon that was up to that point considered lower mid-tier doesn't immediately sell me that that weapon is what I should devote the next 3 months of my life to. When I'm disregarding a data point like that, hearing from someone in my YouTube comments that someone top fragged on a weapon in one game, not a tournament result, but one game, where they didn't even tell me what rank they were at, or whether the teams were coordinated, or what their win rate is overall, or whether the comps favored one team or another, forget about it. Anyone who's really put time in and studied the game knows that a result like that is almost certainly not relevant information to whether the weapon is actually strong in the general case. Another important aspect of analyzing how to place weapons on a tier list is controlling for skill level. Like we talked about with Kiver before, the weapon can make a difference of a little over 200 points of X power, which is substantial, but the most important variable is usually the skill level of the player using it. If we don't control for that, yeah, any weapon can win, but that doesn't tell us anything useful. Obviously, the better player is more likely to win. Like, who didn't know that already? If we let that be a part of the conversation, we can't learn anything about the weapons because there's a confounding variable. We're trying to optimize our play, get every advantage we can. People who are watching a tier list are trying to make sure their weapon choice isn't holding them back in a major way, which is valuable information for people who care about the difference between a 2600 and 2800 X power, or the difference between B rank and A rank, or whatever other progress they're trying to make. Since lower level players are going to make a lot of glaring mistakes and not use their weapons to their full potential, we look at players who won't make nearly as many mistakes and whose mistakes are way less punishable, top level players. Seeing what works for them helps us better determine which differences come from the weapons themselves as opposed to the player's mistakes. Tier lists are not about which weapons are best at a competitive level. They're just about which weapons are the strongest, using data from top-level play because that data helps us control a confounding variable better than other data does. Using top-level play ensures that our conclusions are influenced as little as possible by player skill and as much as possible by weapon viability. But those conclusions will still hold at a fairly low level of play as well. Like I've said, the only way that low-level play differs from top-level play is that low-level players make more mistakes, mistakes that are more easily and decisively punished, and fail to punish opponents for more of their mistakes. As such, unforgiving weapons are going to be underrepresented in lower-level play compared to their actual strength. A weapon like a charger, while capable of winning top-level tournaments, requires you to hit very precise shots to get any value. A charger who isn't hitting their shots simply isn't helping that much. It has a barrier to entry, a skill floor, that must be reached to unlock its potential. Since it takes a few months to really get the hang of the weapon class mechanically, you're not going to see a lot of success from Charger at a low level. But I'll still put it high on a tier list and tell low-level players it's a good weapon, because once you get up to that mechanical skill floor, it's going to work well for you. And at its skill ceiling, it's competitive with any other weapon in the game pushed to peak levels of skill. It's not just at C rank that the weapon will work. It's at any rank in the game. You can say that for a difficult weapon like a charger, or an easier weapon like the sloshing machine, but not an easy weapon like a clash blaster. Your aim can be this far off with the clash blaster and you'll still hit someone, which is an advantage of the weapon on paper, but it's offset so hard once players learn how to aim a 52 gal that I can't recommend the clash blaster to people who are trying to win the game. So when people ask me which weapon is good for beginners or easy to win with, I tell them they're asking the wrong questions, because all those kinds of weapons will do for you is help you beat absolute beginners, after which you're going to be behind because other folks picked weapons that don't fall off, and now they're going to start capitalizing on your weapon's weaknesses. If you're being proactive enough to seek out help from a professional Splatoon coach about how to improve at the game, you are capable of achieving higher than beating absolute beginners. If you have a competitive mindset, you will want to set goals that will actually challenge you, and choose tools that will enable you to rise to those challenges as soon as you're ready to as a player. Finally, in response to the "it's a turf war weapon" argument, turf war works a lot more similarly to ranked modes than I think the players who make these arguments would like to believe. Strong teams will still group up, take fights, contest mid, use a foothold in mid to lock the opposing team into their side, and use their superior map control to score more while they have control of the objective in turf war. A weapon's ability to accomplish these objectives makes them strong in both ranked modes and in turf war. A lot of the time it's painting weapons that throw people because they think painting is the objective in turf war, so better painting weapons are just always better. For one thing, the same is true in splat zones, but let's ignore that and just say yes, paint is an advantage, but it's only one advantage. Compared to an arrow spray, most weapons paint a bit worse, but push in for fights and defensively hold an area of the map better. Their advantage in fighting the arrow spray is significant enough that the arrow spray doesn't get to use its advantage with the greater paint output, because it gets tracked down and splatted before it can access the parts of the map it wants to paint. Strong players are not interested in a strategy that can work if there's another similar strategy that works better. When people complain about my calling a weapon a low tier but it can paint so well though, they're failing to realize that every weapon has some strengths. Every weapon has some attractive qualities to them. Even the big swig roller, the weapon I consider worst in the game right now, is one of the best weapons at painting in the entire game. But there are other weapons that paint well and also provide a special that helps more often, or have a better time to kill, or have more range so they can play more safely, or have bombs they can defend with. If it has bad paint, that can be offset by its ability to fight, or a strong special that supports the team, or long-range pressure. If it has good paint but is weak in all of those other aspects, there's a better weapon to run instead, even in Turf War. Thanks for watching.